can we persuade someone to betray their country or their family or their most closely guarded secrets? This may sound like an intro to a pretty awful and evil conversation on dark manipulation, but this is not the plan. We'll rather talk about skills and techniques to help create a better quality of human connection and relationship management, with an outstanding expert on methods applied by spies, but also applicable by anyone in the business world or in our private lives. Hello, everyone. My name is Interjú Bombera, and thank you for joining us for a talk with Jeremy Hurewitz, a national security consultant, corporate investigator, former journalist, and the author of a program and a book titled Sell Like a Spy, on the occasion that his book is coming out in Hungarian, in my mother tongue, and it sounds like this: Tárgyalj úgy, mint egy titkos ügynök. Hello, Jeremy. Thanks for
Hello. That sounds great.
Hello. Thank you for being here. But I'm not sure if you agree with what I just said, that if we talk about spy skills, secret agent methods to learn professional and everyday use, which you help us learn in your book, we're talking about skills and techniques purely, which is neutral to underlying motivations and can be used for good and bad or bad, depending on the person, just to show the audience that we are indeed goodwill here.
Yes, yeah, that's well put. These are neutral methods. Spies can use them to exploit people after they ascertain motivations to get them to say yes to what I call the world's most difficult sale, which is convincing someone to buy into treason. But what I write in the book and what I speak to people about and train corporate teams on is that these very same skills, as well as the skills from other elite government agents like hostage negotiators, members of the special forces, they all have techniques, methods, ideas that can be extremely useful to us in our careers and in our everyday lives.
Let me first ask you a bit about how you got to where you are now, teaching about spy methods, about the path of your life that took you here. You started your career as a journalist, which I am, in Prague and in Shanghai, and then you built and ran the globally known International Newspaper Association Project Syndicate. Then you joined the world of corporate security, working with secret agents, for example, and now you focus on and help others on how to navigate the broad spectrum of human behavior. What seems to connect to me all your professions is empathy, very active listening, building relationships, gathering information. I'm a journalist. This is what I've done all my life. But when you joined the intelligence world, what was totally new to you compared to the skills you used and known already before?
Well, there are a lot of things that were new to me and that I write about in the book. And most of the people who populate the industry that you highlighted, corporate security and intelligence, are typically people with a government background, but they do hire investigative journalists because of the skill set we have, an ability to write, ability to work quickly on deadline, to develop sources. And I happened to move back to New York in the late 2000s when China was really hot, and I had just spent, a number of years based out of China. So I was exposed to this world. And yes, I had a few things that were in my favor. I had already, as you well know, you have to develop sources, you have to have empathy, and you have to become a good listener if you want to be an effective journalist. But some of the relationship development techniques that I saw firsthand from former CIA case officers, their ability to connect with people that I knew that they didn't like, but you would never know that in their social interactions. The ability of hostage negotiators to talk about how to calm a very emotional encounter and how to think about the motivation of the other side. These were just quick examples of the type of different thinking that I was exposed to. And it really helped me grow and connect with clients that I was trying to grow relationships with, and also in my personal life as well. So I had been thinking about this idea for many years.
The reason I wanted to put it out at the very beginning, that we're not teaching manipulation, but we're teaching connection and listening and of course, changing behavior, influencing, is that a lot of people find this a gray zone, even the awareness or the aim to be aware of how to do these kinds of things. Why do you think that is? Is it dominantly used for bad?
Well, I think people are wary of being manipulated. People are wary of being sold to. What I like to say to people is that people remember how you made them feel, and people buy from those that they like. So if people can see that you're clearly trying to build rapport with them, so in order to, get them to say yes to your pitch, that can easily be seen through in many cases. So there are other ways to connect with people. Sometimes it's just being a great listener, because I ask audiences all the time, think about the best listener you've ever experienced. And then I pause and they think about it. And I have yet to meet anybody who doesn't say that they, very much like and respect their greatest listener. Because when we feel listened to, we feel seen, respected, and understood. So that's the easiest thing to do. But there are other ways to connect with people that don't feel so kind of salesy, like making yourself vulnerable. If you share something about yourself, it humanizes you, and it breeds credibility. And people tend to respond to things in kind. So if I share something with you, Krisztina, you're inclined to then share something about yourself too. So these are methods that are really effective, and they go beyond trying to, just cultivate someone, which people have their guard up on. We're being influenced in so many different directions, whether it's between individuals or on social media or through our, especially in the US, our divisive politics, trying to form that real human connection and showing the person that you're talking to that you're interested in them, you're curious about them, and you're willing to give them the respect of total attention can really make a huge difference.
I'll ask you to elaborate on that being a Hungarian in a historic moment later. But let me first ask you about spies. There's a very interesting take in your book that I've been dying to ask you about. You emphasize the importance of radical empathy. First of all, what does that mean? And shared interest, maybe when building a connection. You say that trust cannot be built if you do not show your real self. And the relationship must be genuine because people sense deception. If we talk about normal connections, honest goals, better work, business or private relationships, I understand genuinity, but how do spies show their real selves? Can you give us some examples to that?
Sure. I think there's a myth about spies that they're, even if they're undercover, they're going to actually share details about themselves and how they view the world. Sometimes that they will use, artificial means and create kind of a persona. But most spies that I know, that I've spoken to, even those that are undercover, will talk about ways they formed real, genuine and factual connections. So, yes, for example, one of the, I talked about vulnerability already, and one of the spies in my book, who I wasn't able to quote by name, was active in the Middle East. And there's a lot of discussion about family in those societies. And he would often share that he has a child on the autism spectrum, which would lead his counterparties to share details about their families and open up. And he didn't make up this autistic son. He has an autistic son. So by being genuine and by making himself vulnerable and sharing something that is a challenge in his life, I'm sure full of beauty as well with that son, but he was able to forge a deeper connection. So there are plenty of examples of how spies become really genuine. And most spies will tell you that the relationships that they have fostered with their agents are oftentimes very real. Even people who are, very difficult people to connect with. You reference radical empathy. I often talk about that and overcoming the challenges of connecting with people. Even some very challenging people, they have formed very strong connections with. And these people wind up saying that you're the only person I can truly talk to or show my true self to. So, the CIA has to kind of rotate case officers out after a few years so these connections don't become too deep and get even more complicated. So that's the way human nature is. We'll do extraordinary things for people if we like them, care for them, feel it's reciprocated, and feel that they're valuable to us.
What's the difference between what you teach us, average people, with those skills and techniques from what they do? Because still, let me come back to manipulation. I mean, those relationships seem to be genuine, but they're not. They're for work and they are for a specific purpose to get something out of someone to be used.
Yes. Well, I would argue that, even the most genuine friendships are a two-way street of being useful to each other. You know what I mean? Your friends provide feedback for you at difficult moments. They give you affirmation. So, a lot of our I wouldn't characterize all of our relationships as transactional, but we as human beings get things from each other. Spies just take that to the next level. I like to say, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, that spies are the world's best salespeople because they make the most difficult sale in the world, which is convincing someone to buy into the concept of treason. Everything can kind of flow beneath that, you know? If you're a person in sales and you're trying to convince someone to buy your product or service, that is a much easier ask than asking someone to, buy into treason. So using the same ideas and methods of connecting with people, getting to know them, winning their respect, showing that you respect them will lead to getting to yes. And that's part of what we're all trying to do. I talk about how life is sales. We're all trying to connect with people, sell ourselves, convince somebody of something. So these skills and techniques are universal throughout different areas of society.
Can you give us some examples, some specific examples of what were the most difficult situations professionally, personally, emotionally, morally to you up to this point?
Oh boy, that's a challenge. The current moment in the Middle East is very challenging in the U.S. Anti-Semitism is up, and it's extremely divisive. Talking about anything in the Middle East, that's been a challenge in the U.S. The ideological violence of our time and living through the Trump era has been an enormous challenge. But just maybe for a little bit of color. I remember when, and I'm thinking of, just east of you with the color revolutions, and when, in I think it was 2004, when Yulia Tymoshenko and Ukraine was trying to throw off the yoke of autocracy and move away from Russia. And we've all seen how that happened, how you referenced my work with Project Syndicate, and we were running columns from Yulia Tymoshenko at the time, kind of a mouthpiece for her to share her views with the West. And there was some concern about our organization being kind of shadowed by the Russians who might try to silence us. So I haven't been a wartime journalist, but I've had a few moments in my life where in my journalism career in particular, I have felt, a hint of danger. Going to Indonesia when the prime minister was being forced out and his followers were threatening suicide bombings. Going to the maritime border of Singapore and Indonesia when maritime piracy was a big problem. Maybe just living in China too, which emotionally was very draining. It was a challenging place to live, even though it was extremely stimulating. So those are some answers. I fear that I didn't give you the one-shot answer and kind of rambled a little bit, but I hope some of that's helpful.
And it also brought me to this pretty recent trauma in Hungary when some of the most amazing investigative journalists were charged with maybe not treason, but having spied on their country while they are true patriots, and they were just applying techniques that journalists are supposed to be applying. So that's interesting how they can interplay and how it also proves your point that these are techniques that can be applied and could be misunderstood or purposefully mispainted.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we face that in the US. The director of the FBI is suing The Atlantic because of their reporting, which is nonsense. It's just a nuisance lawsuit. But this kind of lawfare, this kind of persecution of journalists is outrageous. And unfortunately, the mark of an autocracy and an insecure government.
Let me come back to another area, which is self-knowledge. How does that come into the picture when learning these skills and techniques? Can someone learn others deeply, not knowing themselves deeply enough?
That's a really interesting question, Christina. Where my mind goes when you ask me that is that I talk with people about making these techniques their own. So for instance, mirroring. I teach physical mirroring and verbal mirroring, and I talk about how powerful it can be to layer them together when it comes to shortcutting rapport building and building relationships. And making that, I talk a lot about how making mirroring second nature is really important. So if I was doing some good mirroring, I would do that right now, Christina, so that you'd feel a little bit, warmer towards me. No, but seriously, when I talk about mirroring, though, I say to people, look, if you're somebody who talks with a lot of body language and, you're an energetic person and you're sitting across from a potential client who is, much more, calm, lugubrious, just a different type of body language, you're not going to do yourself a favor by completely changing your persona, so you don't want to become statue still then, because you'll just probably make yourself very awkward. So you need to understand who you are. If you're an introvert and you naturally are a good listener, I tell people lean into that skill of active listening. If you're someone who's gregarious and loves to tell stories and has a colorful background, it makes sense to be someone who can tell stories and, entertain people and lean into that aspect of your personality. I have a section of the book you probably recall called Use Your Superpowers. So I want people to use what they're good at, who they are, their personalities, rather than trying to conform to some model of human behavior that they think they're supposed to conform to, because that's not what I'm selling here. I'm talking about being your full self and trying to use some of these techniques by making them your own and using them in your way.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you just highlighted, because many times people think or feel pressured to learn skills like when you're trained for a TED speech and you have to act the exact same way, like hamburgers are made the same way around the world. That's not what we're talking about.
Right. No, not what we're talking about at all.
Let me ask you some questions that we Hungarians need to find answers to pretty soon, I think. Healing from an era of deep political, social, and ideological divisions.
Yeah.
New Minister of Health has inspired millions of people around the world to learn new dance moves. There are tutorials all over the internet. But I think we need tutorials on how to live better together as well, with better relationships as a society, as a nation. So first of all, let me ask you again, as a list, things that I think matter to us, it's a very personal selection the most now. What is, again, radical empathy?
Sure. And apologies if I didn't answer that earlier, because radical empathy is super interesting. And people have kind of different definitions of it. Some of the individuals who write from the FBI, for instance, former FBI agents have different ways of talking about it. But to me, it's using empathy as a tool specifically, not just, connecting with someone and understanding their pain or where they're coming from. It's trying to really use that skill to understand that person and to find their human core. What I tell people is that 99% of humanity has some redeeming qualities about them. Very few people are true monsters. In my reading of history, Mao is just about the only one that just sounded like, a total monster. Even if you look at Hitler, he apparently really loved Eva Braun. Stalin, who is a monster of history, was a devoted family man. It's only in my reading of history that I found that Mao had almost no warmth, that he was just a bad person. It's a little bit like
I need radical strength to feel the empathy that you're now trying to instill in me, but I'm trying hard.
Trust me, those two figures are not people I feel empathetic towards. I'm just trying to make a point that, and this is a very important one when it comes to how spies use radical empathy, because what I tell people and what I note in the book is that, spies don't get to choose who they're going to cultivate necessarily. They have to connect with criminals, terrorists, diplomats from some of the worst regimes in the world. And in order to find that human connection, because that connection is real, as we already discussed, you have to figure out a way to find that core area of a redeeming quality. So, it's the criminal that's actually a devoted family man. It's the terrorist that practices acts of charitable good. There's usually something that somebody does that, if it's not socially redeeming, makes them interesting. Maybe they're passionate about chess. Maybe they're an avid sailor. Who knows? But it's your task, leveraging intellectual curiosity, active listening, and some of the other skills I write about, to push and to connect deeper. A final point, there's a quote by former, the US president from the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln, who supposedly said, "I don't like that person. I must get to know him better." So you need to take it as a challenge. If you want to influence somebody, if you want to connect to somebody, but that connection isn't automatically there. You have to take it as a challenge to use radical empathy to continue to work at finding the redeeming quality that you can pull out to connect with that person.
And you're so right. I mean, in our private lives, we do have a large sphere of choice, free choice, but not in business, not in the workplace, not when we sell something. In a lot of places, just like you said, spies do not get to choose who they work with. It's true to average people as well.
Yeah, correct.
What do you mean by the power of vulnerability? I think that's something we have to learn as against the power of strength.
Absolutely. Well, making yourself vulnerable triggers people to also share, and it humanizes you, and it creates a different dynamic. So as a tactic, when it comes, I usually talk about it around the same time I talk about radical empathy, because a lot of times, just sticking with the idea of sales, if you're trying to connect to somebody, they oftentimes know that you're having lunch with someone for a pitch, or you're in a corporate boardroom to pitch them, and they have their guard up. But if you can share something about yourself that creates empathy in them, that can be a bridge to connectivity. And Krisztina, what I normally do is share at this moment in my talks or whatever is share a detail about myself. So I had a brain tumor about 15 years ago, and fortunately it was benign, but it cost me the hearing in my right ear. So many times in social settings, at a busy restaurant, for work or whatever, I will try to position myself to be seated with everybody to my left. And if everybody's already seated, I will maybe ask if I could swap seats with you. Or maybe if I'm walking on the street, I have to explain why I keep kind of dancing around you. What I've seen happen, Krisztina, so much is that like somebody who is kind of keeping me at arm's length and is, wary of being pitched will all of a sudden hear this from me. And then they'll tell me something very vulnerable about themselves or a loved one. And that's one of the examples of kind of evolution in behavioral science. We're conditioned to respond in certain ways. Spies know this, and they use it to, leverage that to connect with people. And we can all use that kind of thinking as well. But vulnerability is a really powerful one.
You talk in your book about how to go or move from crawling to running. What does that mean?
Well, that part of my book recounts arguably the biggest sales success I ever had, where I drastically increased the annual spend of a client to the consulting firm I was working for. And it mirrors a spy development technique known as crawl, walk, run. So I advise clients to think about this when they're chasing that big fish, if you will. That's the phrase that we use in English you're going after an important client. You want to take your time. If you're circling that big client, just like a case officer, a spy might be, trying to recruit a big agent, you want to take your time, and you want to try to leverage different aspects that might be able to bring them in rather than one thing. So in this method, I talk about, trying to understand the motivation of this particular client who wanted essentially a seat at the table with the big boys of finance in New York City. And I was able, through what our firm did at the time, to put him at such tables at kind of intellectual events, lunches, dinners, that kind of thing. And so I developed that relationship. And then I started to bring in other senior people from the company to show him different, my respect, bringing in different people, senior people that would talk with him. And critically, many of these people also had expertise that I don't have. And I often find that people in business development, in sales, they have big egos and they think they have to be the star of the show all the time. That's not the way I have operated. Of course, who doesn't like to be the star of the show? But, bringing in other people with different expertise shows the client that you're, thinking about them carefully, and you can showcase the strengths of your firm. And then at the end, when you have to make that ask about payments, closing the deal, if you're the spy revealing, hey, I'm really with the CIA and I want you to help us, you have to do it with conviction, and you have to really be solid in how you're going to make that final pitch. So that's the kind of run aspect of it. So in summary, it's about starting slowly, leveraging whatever resources you can bring to bear. Don't rush it. Let the person, in some cases, kind of come to you. And then when you're ready to make that final push, do it with a lot of, willpower and focus.
While you were telling me this very specific, very personal story, I was thinking that I've been trying to ask you questions with reference from your book that maybe those who are watching us now have not read yet, but of course we know what we're talking about. I was thinking of a collective healing or skills and techniques for a people, for a nation, for a community. So the point of my question at this point is there a difference in how, for example, on an individual basis, client to client, private to private person, business partner, is there a difference between that, the individual horizontal relation, from how you react, for example, to a political body when you teach us how to react to aggression, what the techniques are, the spy techniques are to help us realize lies, how to uncover hidden motivations and what we should do with them. Those are all that are motivated by me from where we're coming from historically now. But of course, your examples are specific and person to person.
Yeah. Well, I do think I approach these techniques, these ideas on a person-to-person level. That's kind of where I think I make a difference and I help organizations. But working collegially, working with clients, I share some ideas about watching a group of people interacting and watching how they mirror behavior. Because once you start to think about human behavior, evolution, behavioral science, you start to see patterns in people that can help with your interaction. So, I'll be clear that it really is about individuals, but I can say that when you step back and, increase the aperture, if you will, questions about negotiation, about diffusing emotional encounters, they're relevant as well, too. So, for the U.S. to come to a successful conclusion about the current impasse with Iran, they have to very much understand the motivations of the other side. And Iran must do the same thing. So, these skills and ideas can be applied on a macro level in that respect. But really what I teach and talk about is about how two people, connect and how you might be able to influence somebody.
When you decided to write the book and you already have a program that you run under the same name, what was your motivation to make the greatest difference from the channel of books and help material available by others to differentiate what you've put out for us now?
Yeah, well, I looked around and I didn't see anybody who was truly teaching the techniques of not only just spies, because there was a little bit of that, but other elite government officials that I've had the good fortune to work with. Like I said, FBI hostage negotiators, members of the Secret Service, and others. So it's a synthesis of these techniques, not only just spies, though, of course, the title is Sell Like a Spy. And, my literary agent and publishers, they seem to agree. So this has a little bit of a niche, and it's fun to work on it.
One last question. This book has, as you've said a couple of times before, for salespeople and business people, business developers as well, or any other people who dominantly, if I'm correct, make data-based, data-driven decisions, and maybe gut feeling driven decisions too, but that's different from what you're teaching, which is a very conscious, awareness driven decision. But you're saying data is not everything. You must win. So you must know by knowing the human psyche. But now in the age of the AI craze, do you think this can be taught to and maybe driven by AI assistants? Millions open up more to a language model now than to any other human being. And you quote Robert Grenier, former director at the CIA, saying something like that intelligence is a deeply human work. Do you think it'll stay that way?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I do think intelligence is being deeply influenced by technology, as it always has. And in fact, I recently wrote a piece with two former spies who are now top lawyers about technology. So, for instance, in previous decades, spies would wear disguises as they transited a major airport. These days, with advanced facial recognition, you can't make that work. You could be wearing a full-on disguise on your face, but they would recognize your retinas and other different details, and it would only make you more suspicious. So spy tradecraft has to evolve with technology. As As for AI, I think that's actually a good place for a final question too, because I talk with audiences a lot about how to thrive in the age of AI. And you'll have to hold me accountable if I'm not answering your question very specifically. But what I tell people when it comes to AI is that, I think the jobs of the future are going to be for people with great emotional intelligence. A lot of the mechanized work, a lot of paralegal work, investment banker work, a lot of clerical work will be done by AI in the future. So it seems. But people with great emotional intelligence will be able to thrive, I think, because, a client is still going to want to go for a lunch at a fancy restaurant, and they're going to want to have an enjoyable conversation if they're going to pick between your consulting firm versus the other consulting firm that does something, let's face it, very similar for a similar price point. Even companies that retail and others that need to interface with the public, people who will be sought after are people that can make others feel good and make them feel understood. When I travel, I'm often just shocked by people I encounter at airports or other places where, nerves are frazzled. People are going to miss flights and they're upset. And oftentimes I see people at a counter, and I'm sure they're having a hard day and it's difficult on them, but they react with anger too. And instead, you need to train these people about how to diffuse the encounter that they're facing, how to let that person know that you empathize with, their stress. And the people that are going to be good at doing this are the people that are going to get hired in the age of AI. Now, Krisztina, did I answer what you wanted me to answer, or did I go off on my own thing there?
I was just thinking that all those things that needed to be in the human brain and in the human heart and the human empathy could be outsourced now to algorithms in a way that has never, ever happened before, the way that psychology is outsourced. A lot of people choose to talk to AI LLMs now. So I was wondering if those skills will be good enough compared to a machine. People choose partners who are digital now because they don't talk back. They have radical empathy more than they ever met a person with.
I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm certainly not an expert in all of this, but I think now remembering a part of your question, that I do think AI can play a role if you're somebody who wants to, put into one of these AI models, who you're looking to speak to, what their background is, and you can ask AI probably what would be some points of interest for me to talk to about this person. I bet there's a lot of helpful ways that AI, I'm certain of it, can help you to consider how to develop with people. And I actually write about in the book about how spies do so much prep work to connect with somebody. So absolutely, adding those questions in to work with AI about when you're trying to develop a relationship with somebody would be a good idea. But maybe I'll regret saying it, but I don't think a machine is going to fully take the place of human encounters. Even if there are, people who want to have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend or somebody that'll just listen, I still think people crave human connection, and I suspect they always will.
Well, we, your audience, do crave the connection with you. That's going to take place soon. You're coming to Hungary, which is not a new thing for you. You've been here before. What are you what's your expectation at this moment from Hungary and from your visit? What are you interested the most when you show up here?
Well, I'm really excited about the reception from my publisher and the event that's going to be put on, and talking maybe with members of the media. That's all, enjoyable stuff for me. But I feel really privileged to come to Hungary at a time of such an exciting transition. I think it's going to be a really wonderful moment of optimism and ebullience, if I can say that correctly, just kind of a general happiness in society after this major change has occurred. I think it'll be a thrilling time to be there. And I do have a few friends, I think some of whom are involved in politics there. So I look forward to having some really interesting conversations where, as an American living through, essentially an authoritarian government that we're facing right now, that's supported, Viktor Orban, I'm very interested to learn how you were able to rid yourself of that kind of leader, and maybe we can learn a few things from you.
And I think this is a historic moment, a historic time for us to learn all those skills that you're teaching in your book on a very personal level, to connect better, to have better quality in our
I hope so.
hands. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you soon.
My pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you as well.
Köszönöm a beszélgetést, a nézőknek a figyelmet. Jeremy Hurewitz-szel személyesen találkozhattok május 7-én a BookLab Üzleti Könyvklubban.